Welcome to the 57th episode of the Electric Bison, and happy Memorial Day 2025. I was just counting through the list of names of Montanans that we know fought at the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium and along the German border and down by, in December 1944. And there's 242 names that we know of, Randy and I know about. Randy's here again, my buddy, that we know about, and 30 of them were killed. So that was a pretty serious blow to a lot of Montana families. If you're of our generation, I was born in 1946, I think Randy's a little bit younger. The Battle of the Bulge was a kitchen topic. I mean, I remember my mother talking about it when I was probably 5 years old. So that would have been 6 years after the battle, which now doesn't seem very long at all to me. But the reason she would talk about it is her cousin Jack, he was a kid from Butte. He had joined the 101st Airborne Division after Pearl Harbor. He had been out at working at the 90th Pursuit Squadron in Hawaii. And he jumped into Normandy on D-Day, and then he was in Market Garden. He got hurt there. He was trapped under a Jeep for 3 days. He got some medals at Normandy. And then he got back, it was healed up in time to get back to be put on trucks and run up to Belgium to try to save the day or help save the day when the Germans attacked. And I knew about that, and I knew about it maybe more so because of that. It was a big thing. But I think a lot of Montanans knew about it because what Randy and I have found, he's always talking me into stuff. He talked me into helping him with a book, and he did most of the work, really. But it was fun for both of us on the Battle of the Bulge. And we wrote this book about the Battle of the Bulge from a Montana perspective. And I was really glad he wrote me into it. It was a good thing to do, because as much as I know about military history, having been to all the different infantry and armor schools and Command and General Staff College and Army War College, I didn't really know that much about it. And it was a terrific battle, terrific. It was the major land battle of the U.S. has ever had. And it wasn't just one fight, of divisions against divisions. It was at least 10 separate areas where it was just a constant struggle for weeks, where we were losing 500 men a day just to being killed. And people had been watching our armed forces go across Europe in the Second World War. It looked like we were going to win, or the war was going to be over with soon. And then suddenly this terrible thing happened. It was like it's going the other way, and there's a big bulge in our lines, and that's how we got to be the name the Battle of the Bulge. And the people who were in the battle, in some facet of it, probably thought it was the Battle of the Bulge, but it was just one piece of it. And that's what really struck home with me when Randy and I went out to Belgium, to Bastogne, which is one of the names associated with the battle. And it dawned on me just how vast this thing was. And it got done in a time just before the Russians had their spring offensive in 1945. And we're going to talk about it today. But before we do, I want to remind you that there's 3 dates. There's Veterans Day, there's Armed Forces Day, and then there's Memorial Day. And I had to sort that all out. Well, Armed Forces Day is for us to show some respect for people who are in the military right now. And Veterans Day is for us to show respect for people who have been in the military and are veterans. So that's great. And then Memorial Day, though, is the day that we show respect for people who gave their lives for our country. And so that's why we decided to talk about what we had learned when we went over to Bastogne. So if you get a chance on this podcast, if you go back to the earlier, I think there's 21 earlier episodes, starting with about episode 3, where each one of the things that we'll be talking about, each one of the major areas we talk about, is a whole episode's dedicated to it if you want to learn more about this. And then before I asked Randy to take us into this whole thing with a kind of an overview, you'll hear talk of Panzer SS units. The SS, the bad guys. Well, what exactly were those? They were called hall protectors, and they were in the scene with Hitler way early, in the early 30s, when there were brawls around the beer halls in Germany. But the people that had the focus of public attention then were called the brown shirts, and they were military veterans, that were disenchanted. They thought they were going to be part of a new military force in Germany. That's kind of where they were coming from. And what happened was after the Enabling Act that happened in 1933, where Hitler was able to get complete power to make laws from the Reichstag. He put the Reichstag in a place where it was very intimidating and got the votes necessary. So legally, he got the power to be the dictator of Germany. What he did then is he got the leaders of the brown shirts into a Bavarian resort, and they thought they were coming to talk business, about what they were going to do in the next years in Germany. And some other guys that wore black shirts, they showed up and helped out across Germany and killed at least 207 of the brown shirts, killed them, murdered them, up to maybe 1,000. The number is kind of been not determined. But when that happened over the Night of the Long Knives, which happened 3 nights, Hitler came out of it and he said, well, I've just saved Germany a lot of trouble. I got rid of these Bolsheviks that were trying to have a revolution and yada, yada, yada. And nobody came forward and objected. The Catholic Church didn't. The labor unions didn't. Nobody of any consequence objected. And he got away with it. And so from that time, this small group of black shirts, the SS, under Himmler, started expanding. They would have new organizations. They would come and touch the blood banner, which was associated with Hitler in one of his earlier beer hall things. And then when the war first broke out and they went into Poland, there were only 3 regiments of SS soldiers. And the SS soldiers, they were more physically fit than the Wehrmacht. The Wehrmacht were like National Guardsmen are. They were from small towns. They were, uncles with their nephews and sons with their fathers. And they were really good troops. The German Wehrmacht were good troops. And they held together. They took care of each other, which is one of the real advantages of the Guard, the National Guard in our country. For the long haul, they're great troops. But the SS, and they had higher IQs. The work's been done on this, higher IQs than the SS. They're just regular people, a regular cross-section. But the SS had lower IQs, but they were very proficient. And they really, really went for loyalty. So what they did is they swore loyalty to one man instead of to the rights of all the people in their country. And so after they proved themselves as regiments going into Poland, they gradually got to be bigger, so that there eventually, by the time of the Battle of the Bulge, there were 39 SS divisions. 7 of them were Panzer Division, meaning they had tanks, and they were dangerous as could be. And they were the ones that you'll find that Hitler relied on a lot because of the loyalty, not because of the competence. Loyalty. It's a big difference. And if you find yourself being pulled into a situation where you're with somebody because you want to be loyal, even though you know they're doing wrong, time to ask some questions. And some of those SS people didn't, or they all didn't, and they ended up dead, and you'll see how that happened. But when we went to Bastogne, one of the things I was struck by is our fields of crosses, Carrara marble crosses. There's about 13,000 of them in the 2 nearest cemeteries, up at Henry Chapelle and down at Ham in Luxembourg. Those are 1/3 of the total number of American GIs that were buried there, and then 2/3 were eventually brought back to this country, to the cemeteries like the Custer Battlefield and so forth. But when we went to the German cemetery, they're big fields too. They're black stone crosses. The soldiers are buried 6 deep. And you could always tell where the SS guy was. They'll say Lieutenant so-and-so, and then they'll say whether they're SS or not, or whether they're from Hungary or wherever. And I always felt bad for them getting themselves into that kind of a fix. And you just don't want to have that happen. I felt bad for the Wehrmacht getting themselves in a fix where they were being forced by being alongside the SS to have to be in a fight like this. But it was their choice, and it didn't end well for them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Randy to talk about the Battle of the Bulge, and then we'll see where it goes.
Okay, John, do you want me to just do a little survey?
Yeah,
Okay. Basically, we have a map here I can use if I can show that map. This is the Germans had put together by December 16th, the morning they started the whole assault. They put together 3 German armies. They had 240,000 men, 2,000, 3,000 artillery pieces, a couple thousand tanks, including Tiger tanks that are so tough and so strong. And they had this all assembled, and on our side to oppose them, we didn't know they were coming. We had 80,000 guys. So it was quite a mismatch. It's amazing that our guys held on. And so there were sort of 5 German corridors or thrusts. They're trying to get across and to wipe us out on the way to Antwerp, Belgium, where our supply base is. And so the whole thing is they have the 6th Panzer SS Army up here in the north, and they're going to go across here this way. And then there's 2 thrusts there. One is the 12th SS Panzer Division is going up here toward Elsenborn Ridge. They're going to try to seal off the northern border, because up here we have the 9th U.S. Army, a whole army up there, a lot of divisions we can bring down to help out. So their job is to seal us off up there. Then below them comes in 1st SS Panzer Division under Joachim Peiper, who has a smaller force of 3,000 men, but he has 90 tanks, including 50 Tigers. And they're going to be the spearhead. They're going to strike right through fast and get over here and seize the bridges over the Amblev River so they can get up to break through our lines, get up to Belgium, to Antwerp. Those are the 2 main northern thrusts. And they're what John talked about, the SS Panzer Divisions. The 12th SS Panzer that's going up here to seal off the north and is basically called the Murder Division. And they're a Hitler Youth division. They were drawn from the Hitler Youth. And they had a bad reputation. In Normandy, they massacred their Canadian prisoners that they had taken. The 1st SS that went below them on a separate road under Joachim Peiper, this young hotshot, was supposed to be the one to really break through in the north. And that was the shortest route to Antwerp, which is the objective. So Peiper is coming along right below the 12th. Now, up in the northern place, there's a place up here called Hofen. And the 12th SS and the Volksgrenadiers, the infantry divisions and so forth, were in this area. There was a rancher's son from Wisdom, Montana, Jay Nelson, and we write about him in our book, who was here. And he held out, and that group held out there against numerous attacks. They were in foxholes, holding off artilleries and tanks, and they were in the freezing cold for about 5 days out there. And finally, after they blocked the Germans entirely, that was the first German failure on the whole offensive. They couldn't believe it. They got stopped by this regiment. And Jay Nelson said that after he fought that battle, they gave him a 3-day leave to go back at the Theemister, Belgium, back in the rear area, to have a leave in a small town, 3-day leave. And he went into a darkened theater, he said. He wrote about it later. He went into a darkened theater and sit there in the dark to calm his nerves. That's how tough it was. Below him is Peiper coming along. And the 1st SS Division is famous. They came from Russia. These weren't amateurs. These weren't rookies. These guys have been fighting in Russia for a few years already. And they had a terrible fight over there in the cold. They're used to the cold conditions. They got the Tiger tanks, these huge Tiger tanks, and they're brutal. They were called the blowtorch division because of what they did in Poland and Russia to the villages they went through, killing people and so forth. The SS was a very tough outfit, and they didn't like to surrender. We found that out in Normandy. But our guys did beat them in Normandy, too, and they're going to beat them again here. They come through here a little bit south, and they're trying to get Stavelot and Stoumont. Stoumont is about as far as they got. And on the way, the sad thing is they massacred a lot of Americans that they took prisoner along the way, the Piper's group, the 1st SS. And they got held up at this place called Krinkelt here. They thought they would, I'm sorry, I go back to the 12th SS. When I was talking about the Battle of Hofen, that 12th SS, the Hitlerjugend, got held up at Krinkelt, at Twin Cities there, Krinkelt and Rokeroth. They thought they were going to swing right through, but they got eaten up by our guys in 2nd Infantry Division. One of those guys was Sam Milesnik from Belgrade, Montana, rancher's son. A lot of our Montana soldiers seem to be rancher's sons out there. Yeah. And Milesnik was there with some bazookas and had to take on all these German tanks coming at him that morning in a surprise attack. And they held off the Germans there. And the Germans took terrible casualties. And basically, the 12th SS was stopped between Krinkelt and Dom-Butenbach, which is here. They got stopped. They weren't able to seal off the north. It was a big failure. And coming to a group that's not used to losing. So we're back down on the 1st SS with Piper again. And Piper's driving through the Stavelot and Stoumont, and here he gets stopped by the 30th Infantry Division, the Old Hickory, which had actually stopped them once before in the Normandy at a place called Mortain. And they had a motto, those Old Hickory, those guys from North Carolina and so forth and everywhere, that we stopped them at Stoumont, at Mortain, and we can stop them again. And they did. And the 82nd Airborne was there to help them. But these guys that blocked them along the way, fought them along the way, and on the way, Piper massacred American soldiers at Hofen and at Malmedy, as everybody knows about that. That's almost 100 guys they shot in the field and killed our guys. Made us very mad. We fought even harder. But that's the type of guys we were dealing with. And they got down here pretty far, but when they ran into the 82nd Airborne here, they got stopped. So you got guys like Jay Nelson and Sam Milesnik and a lot of other Montanans fighting in these battles.
Yeah, Pat McKelvey's father was in the 30th, they told me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So the 30th did a wonderful job. They all did a wonderful job, and they stopped them. There's a couple of interesting things on the Piper run. Piper's job was to break through, to get there fast. He was going to speed through because he had to seize the bridges over the Amblève River. When you get up here to Stavelot, there's a lot of bridges and the river's going right through them. They've got to get their tanks across those bridges. And they got to seize them and hold them first before the American reinforcements can come in and block them there, take over those bridges. So what they did is they had a parachute battalion under a guy named von Heidke, Colonel von Heidke, German 800 paratroopers dropping in to grab those bridges and hold them until Piper got there. Well, the thing that happened though was the U.S. 116th Anti-Aircraft Battalion that had guys in it from Montana like Bill Coldiron and Ed Gilran.
Yeah, Mike Gilran's dad.
So they were there. You know what? Those guys shot down all the German airplanes and shot down the 800 paratroopers. Not hardly a single one made it through out of that. So they were Johnny on the spot. Those guys with the big guns, with the 90 millimeter artillery, shot down the paratroopers. That was an important thing because then the U.S. engineers could get in there and seize those bridges, and they did. And by the time Piper got there, he kept saying, "Damn the engineers," because they blocked him, they stopped him. So Piper got stopped because he couldn't get across the bridges because of some engineers, American engineers, who were very tough and brave. And then also the 30th Infantry Division stopped him with the 82nd Airborne helping at a place called Chenot. So that's the northern thing. Then there's a central thrust through St. Vith and Bastogne. And that's a different German army under Manteuffel. It's the 5th German Panzer Army. Now these are Panzer armies. These are heavy with tanks. And so the battle towards St. Vith is one where the American 7th Armored Division and the 9th Armored, mainly the 7th Armored, did a horseshoe around St. Vith, the city. And they held out for 5 days. They blocked the Germans coming through. And the Germans, again, they couldn't believe it. They had this huge army coming through, the 62nd Volksgrenadiers Infantry Division, the 18th Volksgrenadiers. They ran over the 106th U.S. Division, captured 2 of the 3 regiments. They were very tough, and they came fast, but they got stopped at St. Vith. And they got stopped for 5 days. And Manteuffel, the German general, later said, this was the battle. He said he couldn't believe we stopped him. He said, this was the battle of the small men. 4 or 5 guys fighting it out here and there in the forest, stopping tanks. It was quite amazing. And after the war, the German commander said that, we asked them, well, what caused you, was it the traffic jams, or what caused you not to be able to take St. Vith and so forth? They said, no, we underestimated the American soldiers. They were, quite frankly, they were tough. So anyway, they got a lot of credit, the 7th Armored especially there. So you got the central thrust through St. Vith, and Manteuffel had another thrust through the center at another road junction for Bastogne. So he had 2 of his 5th Army groups going through, one to St. Vith and one to Bastogne. And one to Bastogne included the best divisions, Panzerlehr, the 2nd Panzer Division, and the 560th Volksgrenadiers. Very tough, and they had some others there too with them. And they were the elite. They were the ones who trained the German armored divisions, Panzerlehr, Bayerland, and had been with Rommel in North Africa. These were really tough guys. And so they're blocked by the 28th United States Infantry Division, 3 regiments, 109th, 110th, and 112th. The Pennsylvania, Keystone Division, the Pennsylvania National Guard, Keystone Division. They were all wiped out almost. And in a place called Clairvaux, where John and I visited there, where the Germans were trying to break through these 3 SS divisions, they stopped them, but it took terrible, terrible casualties. 1/3 of the men in the 110th Regiment under Colonel Fuller got either the Bronze Star or the Silver Star. I mean, it was great. They bought time. They held the Germans off. This was the morning of the 16th. The 28th Infantry Division, the U.S., that had been mauled so badly in the Hurtgen Forest before and had been sent down there to rest, they stopped the Germans until the 18th, until the evening of the 18th. They gave time for the 101st Airborne and the 10th Armored Division of the U.S. to get into Bastogne before the Germans got there. And that was crucial. That was maybe the war. Some people say Piper was the war, but this was really the war down here, Bastogne, with the 7 road junctions. So anyway, those are the 2, and in the central thrust under Manteuffel's 5th Army, I talked about the 6th Panzer earlier up there in the north, and then there's one more thrust, and that's in the south, and this is a German 7th Army under a guy named Brandenburger, General Brandenburger, and he's got a 5th Parachute Division, which is very tough. German paratroops were probably even better than the SS divisions generally. They're very tough. We found that out in Normandy, in Italy. So the 5th Fallschirm, or the 5th Parachute, 357th, a lot of different infantry divisions of the Germans. They didn't have tanks, but the job was to get here and seal off the south. Like the 12th SS was supposed to seal off the northern U.S. Army up here in Holland. Well, this one was supposed to stop Patton's army coming up from the Saar, because they know Patton's going to be coming up to relieve Bastogne and help out. So their job is to get there and form a blocking line. And they were very tough and very good. And it was very bad country, very icy, very hilly. The weather was below 0. And it was 5 days slog for Patton. It was just terrible, terribly tough. And he had the 26th Infantry Division, the 80th Infantry Division, and the 4th Armored Division, Patton sent up there to break through and to relieve the guys at Bastogne, because we had the 101st and the 10th Armored holding off the Germans that were surrounded. They were surrounded and Bastogne cut off. And you know the story about that, where the Germans told them to surrender, and we said, nuts, we're not going to surrender. And we didn't. We held out, 101st. But Patton finally broke through with 5-day terrible slog, a lot of terrible battles. Patton later after the war said that drive north from the Saar to get there 110 miles to help the 101st in Bastogne, that was the major accomplishment of his army in the war. And he was everywhere, as you know. And then he said, not only that, he said that is the most significant achievement of the U.S. Army overall in the war, in the Eastern European theater. The most significant achievement, just breaking through, fighting their way through those hills against the German paratroopers and tanks. So anyway, that was the bottom thrust. And so John, that sort of touches on it. We got a lot of stories we can tell about each one, but we can go into that if you want.
Maybe we could do one of the things, the little yellow dots up on the map, or the blue dots, are the men from Montana were that first day at 5:30 in the morning when the searchlights went off on the clouds. Artillery started coming in all up and down that line, and it was like, oh my God, what have I got myself into? Well, those blue dots are Montanans that were there then. Then the green dots are the ones that came in the next day or two to help out. The red, they're not all there, but because some are off the map. But the red dots are men that were killed, and some of the blue dots, they were there initially and then they were killed or they were captured. The orange dots, those are the Montanans that were with the 106th that got taken prisoner. Like with Kurt Vonnegut, he was taken prisoner, and from that he wrote the book Stalag, or what was it called, Slaughterhouse 5.
Yeah.
But there was a guy from Whitefish, Montana, named Howard Akey, an artist up there, and he wrote a little manuscript that we went through called Time Out of Time, and he was with the 106th, and he talks about going back through German lines, disarmed, and going to Stalag 3A, and then the most moving part of he talks about how when they were marching from one prison camp to another, how they tried to save some of the Jewish people that were trying to get away, let them go in amongst them, but every time they went through a narrow opening, the German guards would pick out the Jewish prisoners real quick because they were so skinny and they were dressed differently. But it's really poignant. When he came back into New York Harbor with the other men that he'd been with that had been captured in the Battle of the Bulge, and they were so pleased to get home, and then they got off their ship and they got up on their train, and he noticed that his watch had started again, and he just was so glad to get home, and he said, I felt like I did what I was supposed to do, but boy, am I glad to be home. And that's what these guys did. They did what they thought they needed to do, and some ended up dead, of course. Some ended up prisoners. I think I wanted to mention Howard Akey, but also when if any of you have ever seen that movie about Patton, where he makes the decision to go north with his 3 divisions abreast. 2 things about that. There's a lot of information, but he talks about the war prayer, and he told the chaplain he needed a prayer that would get him some clear weather. Well, that chaplain was from Helena. His name was Father James O'Neill, and he'd been teaching at Carroll College, and he's the one that wrote the Patton's weather prayer. Dear God, give us fair weather, so they could get open skies for air cover, and then because of that, Patton thought it was a pretty good prayer. He gave him a Bronze Star. But he was from Helena, from the Carroll College faculty. And then another thing is when the 3 divisions went north with Patton, the division on the left was an armored division. It was the 4th Armored Division. The division on the far right was the 80th, the Blue Ridge Division. And in the 80th was a young guy from Hysham, Montana, named Dave Manning. He was 20 years old. He was a promising athlete, good student. His dad, Dave Manning, was in the legislature, and Dave, young Dave, he was with a team that went across to get with the 4th Armor, and as they were just for 5 days just slugging. Patton thought they could bypass stuff. They couldn't bypass it. They had to fight their whole way up, and when they got up there, Manning had and his I don't know, must have been a company, crossed over to be on the left side of the 4th Armor Division, and it was trying to get into Bastogne. It was the one that had the best chance, and it had a Combat Command C and Combat Command B, but it also had a Combat Command R that was kind of the reinforcing unit, and that's who Dave Manning was with. And at the last minute, Combat Command R, which was led by a young officer named Colonel Creighton Abrams, kind of like a slingshot, went forward. And it's the one that made the final break into Bastogne. It went around and it tore up some Germans that were there. But on that day, December 25th, Christmas of 1944, is when they broke into and relieved Bastogne. And on that day is when you'll find, if you go to Hysham, on the Yucca Theater, you know, the old theater that the Manning family had that's there on Main Street, you'll see it's dedicated to Dave Manning, who was killed in action on December 25th, 1944. So can you think of some things? And I'll be
John,
thinking
you
of
know Captain John Sheehan from Butte, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And he was at Bastogne, and he rescued some medics, I think.
Yeah, one of the things, yeah, that's a good point. This is Bastogne over here. And when you know, what happened is they had enough time, the 101st and the 10th Armor had enough time to set up roadblocks in a circle in the small towns around Bastogne. And Father Sheehan, people in Butte certainly know him because Sheehan Park is down there by the freeway. But he was from the St. Mary's Parish in Butte, and he had joined the chaplain corps, and he had already been cited several times. He already had, I think, a Silver Star. But he's out there in up in this part, the northwest of Bastogne, and he went out to get two medics that were wounded. He got one medic on each shoulder, and he was carrying him back, and he got shot by a 20-millimeter cannon. And that put an end to his war. But when he got back to Butte, he was still alive. He was recovering from wounds while he was being a pastor in Butte. People just loved him, and they would never talk about it. He just thought highly of the men that did the work, got the job done, came home. End of story. That's kind of his approach. But he'd always say he got shot in the back, advancing backwards while he was rescuing two corpsmen, one on each shoulder when he got shot. And that's what Sheehan Memorial Park is named for. A casualty from the Battle of the Bulge. He died of his wounds by the end of 1946. And of course, the whole town of Butte was really sad about that.
John, you also had a relative named John Green who was at Bastogne, right?
Well, yeah, I mentioned him earlier, but he must have got messed up when that Jeep was on top of him. He was with 4 other guys who were dead under the Jeep for 3 days, 2 days. But then when he recovered, he was able to get into Bastogne with the 101st. They did whatever they had to do there. But when he came home to Montana with all of his bucket full of medals and campaign ribbons, he went down to California and he joined a police force there. And then just by the end of 1946, he was a policeman. He's showing his wife how Russian roulette works with a live round in the chamber, and he blew his own brains out. And neither John Green from Butte or Father Sheehan from Butte, both of whom were clearly casualties from the Battle of the Bulge and from the Second World War, are listed as casualties of the Second World War or in any status, which tells you that war took a bigger toll than we have counted so far. But,
there are a couple other fellows too from Helena, for example, Bill Leaphart. When Bastogne was surrounded and they were trapped in Bastogne, and their hospital was even wiped out and captured by the Germans. So they were there. They didn't have any supplies for days. They were just barely almost running out of ammunition and medical supplies. The Belgian families took in our wounded soldiers and helped them. But Bill Leaphart was a pilot for C-47s. And he later became important, as you know, jurist in Helena.
He did it. They asked for volunteers. They expected a real high percentage of planes being shot down, and they relieved Bastogne from the air. Right. And he just wanted to do something to help the soldiers because he knew how bad it was for him down there. Another guy is Fred Bauer from Missoula. Yeah. Fred Bauer was one of he had been the Missoula smoke jumpers started before the Army Airborne did. When the Army Airborne, the Corps of trainers came out, they were getting it set up, they came out to Missoula to watch the first fire jumps by smoke jumpers because it had started just a couple months before. And Fred Bauer was flying one of those planes in the early smoke jumper program. So he goes off, he's in the Army, he's at the Battle of the Bulge, relieved Bastogne from the air. He got, I think, a Silver Star. And then he comes back, and he was really important in the Smoke Jumper Aerial Fire Depot project. And he's kind of a legend. And there's oral histories by him at the university in the Mansfield archives. Yeah, and then there was several smoke jump. There was smoke jumpers with the 517th. There was Bob Crow, who worked in the old Veterans Hospital in Miles City. He was the 101st. Mm-hmm. He told us about how he was at Bastogne, and I said, well, tell me about it. And he said, well, I can remember the rat that was with me in my hole under this barn. And you know, there were others, and then he had another guy named Cummings with him in the 501st PIR that also ended up in Missoula as a smoke jumper. So there's quite a few of those early smoke jumpers came back. They were airborne qualified already.
One of the fellows at Man Gulch, right, had been at the Battle of
the Jewish American guy. I can't think of his name right now.
Plus, you had John and Bob Harrison. John Harrison, of course, was a colonel.
Yeah.
And University of Montana Law School, dean and so forth. And he got involved in investigating the Malmedy massacre. He was on Eisenhower's staff to help plan D-Day, the invasion. But he had a brother named Bob Harrison who was at the southern part of Bastogne when they were surrounded and the Germans were attacking on the 18th.
He was in I Company of the 101st of the, I think, 506 PIR. PIR means Parachute Infantry Regiment. Mm-hmm. But he was at the town of Warden, which is right here. Mm-hmm. That pink dot is Harrison, because what happened is he took 150 people and they went into that town just as a whole bunch of German tanks were coming in from the other side, and they stopped him, but everybody was wounded or killed except for just a handful that got out the other side. He was captured and he was sent to a POW camp in Germany, but then he was killed trying to escape. So yeah, his brother John, who was a Supreme Court judge here in Montana, when he was up working on the Malmedy massacre site, he got word of his brother missing, and he spent a lot of time trying to find out where he was, but that's what happened to him.
And I think that Tim Babcock was up in the 395th Infantry Regiment up in the northern sector we were talking about earlier, holding off the SS troops up there.
Yeah, Governor Tim Babcock was with the 99th Infantry, which was the checkerboard regiment, the blue and white checkerboard. Yeah. And he was at the Bridge of Remagen later on, but he.
I made a trip down to Camp Van Dorn where the checkerboard trained. They have a monument John and I saw up there at Krinkelt, and calling them battle babies. But there's a unit, the 99th Infantry Division, that really held the line, and nobody expected out of those rookies. Really.
Yeah, I remember when the German Panzer Division that went through to the twin villages, Krinkelt and Roshrath, and they were killing 99th Infantry guys. A lot of them. One of the battalions had 70% casualties. Yeah. And they were the first people to receive that attack in the woods.
Yeah.
But what struck me is later on another German general with a follow-on infantry regiment was going behind the 12th Panzer, and he said the forest was strewn with 99th infantrymen who, a lot of them bayoneted in their foxholes. Yeah. And he said they fought so well. Yeah. And that's the thing. These Americans who would really rather be someplace else, they fought so well. And they need to be remembered, I think. There was something greater than what Hitler thought they were. He called us mongrels, and he thought that we would run. And we didn't. But a lot of people died. I think 20,000 American soldiers died.
20,000, another 40,000 wounded in this battle, in addition to 20,000 killed. John and I found when we traveled around Montana with our book, after we got back, and after the book was published, we went around and talked about the Bulge and met the families of people who were in the book. Yeah. And it was fascinating meeting the families because they didn't know what their fathers and brothers had done out there.
Yeah.
They came home, they didn't talk about it. You know,
That
most
was
of the
just
time.
common. They just never said a word.
Yeah.
It might be in their obituary. Was in the Battle of the Bulge.
That's right. They were proud of having served in the Battle of the Bulge. And the conditions were so difficult. They always said that the cold was the main enemy they faced. But,
Yeah.
And we stood over those foxholes at Bastogne where the 101st was. We saw what they're like. They're not very deep. They're pretty cold out there. It was below freezing. But the families are, you know, they were so happy to find out that their relatives have actually made a difference, you know, that people go out there and they stand at some crossroads and they fight the Germans and they get shot up and they come back home and they go back to work. And it was amazing to us.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of my high school. My
Yeah,
high
right.
school geometry teacher,
Right.
Tom Donovan. He was from Anaconda. His dad was a union, I think, business agent for the union there in Anaconda. But Tom, he was with the 35th Combat Engineer Battalion. They worked on the Alcan Highway, but they ended up in Bastogne, and they were a really critically important unit. They were moved all over that battlefield. Wherever there was a problem, they were put there. Some of the subordinate units got wiped out, but Tom would never talk about it, Mr. Donovan. But he would talk about the time that they got a break and they put them in trucks and took them down into this part of down by France, and all he would say is that they'd gotten loose into a French wine cellar and they had a great time. That's what he would talk about, and he's in the middle of this thing, and that was common. That was common.
Another thing that was common is you were out there in a foxhole. It's 5:30 in the morning on the 16th of December, and it's below zero. And this is all up and down the line, the 4th Infantry down south to everywhere. And all of a sudden the Germans are coming with tanks and artillery barrage and SS soldiers, and you're told, you call back, and you're told, hold at all costs. And you'll say, well, what does that mean? They'll say, you figure it out, you know, You're not retreating, you're not giving up, you're holding it. And they did. You know, so many died, but they held it all.
The guy from Belgrade that destroyed all the tanks in the Twin Villages, they said, well, why did you do that? And he says, well, they said, don't stay here.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
That's what it came down to.
Some historians have written about that battle up there at Krinkelt, where Miles Neck got the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the next highest after the Medal of Honor, but below the Medal of Honor. But they, like John said, they asked him, well, why did you stay? And he said, well, we had the orders to stay, and we held, and a couple of bazookas showed up, and this guy wiped out 3 German tanks, and was wounded and sent back.
And then there's some that made attacks that never came back, you know, like Lewing from down on the Crow Reservation.
Oh, yes, wow.
You know, I mean,
on the counteroffensive.
The whole unit disappeared. It would surprise Americans to know how much courage our fellow Americans have, and it's still there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But also it's important to remember it from time to time. Yeah.
It was huge. You know, John, we had, by the end of the battle, we started out with 80,000 guys, and the Germans kept upping the ante in Bastogne, for example, bringing in all kinds of more units from Italy and Denmark and everywhere to fight this battle, because Hitler really wanted Bastogne. And the first time they couldn't take it, they went on over to the march to the Meuse River, and then they lost over there and they came back. But Germans had 400,000 troops in the Bulge before it was over. We had 600,000. When you bring up our reserves, it kept coming in. And we met all these guys who were in the 75th and all these guys. Remember the fellow from, gosh, well, I can't remember the name of it, but there was just so many, Biesneck or something like that. But there were all these great stories, and we actually went around even to the veterans hospitals in Miles City and so forth, going around the state. It was very touching.
When I read about how Senator Manning, I knew Senator Manning, Dave Manning. He was around a long time, but I read that in the newspapers when his son was killed, he was coming out of a legislative meeting in the state capitol on the 19th of January. This was a month later. He gets a telegram saying your son's been killed, and it had to be just tough as hell for those people, you know. But they did it.
Well, take Chenot. There's a battle up there north, near Stomont, Stavolo. John, we stayed in Stavolo, but there was a battle up there where the 82nd Airborne and the 3rd Armor were all up there fighting together, and the 82nd Airborne was taking on the German 1st SS Panzer Division. And they had a terrible battle in that place where they had to charge across we had to charge across an open field to drive them away from the bridges and from the Ambly River. And one company of the 82nd Airborne ended up with 18 guys left. There's 300-man companies, 18 guys, another one had 39 guys left, charging German flak platforms. They had these 20-millimeter cannons that John talked about mounted on platforms out there. And they charged across the open field, and they took it. They took horrible losses. And Air Marshal Tedder, who was the British guy who was in the command with Eisenhower and all those guys together, the big guys, you know, Patton and all of them. But Marshal Tedder was a deputy from Field Marshal Montgomery. And he'd seen a lot of the interaction. He'd seen a lot of the American and British. We were working together on this stuff. And Montgomery was actually with us at the Bulge. And British Field Marshal Montgomery of Alamein, he was there. And Tedder said after that battle, he said he's seen a lot of units in British, American, Canadian armies and so forth. He said, man for man, Reuben Tucker's regiment of the 82nd Infantry Division, that they're at Chenot, is the best unit in the world. Better than the Germans, better than anybody, best he's ever seen. And they were also heroes at Market Garden. And, but so the 82nd Airborne is one of the units I always think of. We had a guy there too from Montana.
Well, Piper's thrust was close to successful, and he had the same number of tanks in his spearhead group as an entire Panzer division, and so he has to deal with the engineers, those damn engineers. He gets up to a place called Stomont Station on the other side of Stavelot, and there's only one roadblock left to keep him from breaking through and going across the Meuse River, and he was home free. And so the head of the 30th Division, those are the guys that Pat McKelvey's dad fought with, that came down, that were trying to stop him. The commander, he was all out of tricks, and he put out a call for help. And there was nobody to come and help. All of our resources were within reach, there weren't any. Except there was a tank destroyer company, the 705th, they were called the Red Devils, and they had just come into Europe, and they didn't have their equipment yet. And a guy from Helena named Don Lovely was with them. He was, I think, an attorney here in town. And what they did is they got into some other warehouses and got some old amphibious tanks. They got some broken down Sherman tanks. And then they got some ammunition, fixed them all up, and then they came on the run to help stop Piper with some elements of the 30th Division and the 82nd Airborne Division, and that's where it stopped. They came in, and later on, when Lovely was being interviewed, he says, well, we found and we got what we needed, and they headed out, and they came and they helped. And so those kind of things happened. And then what happened is Piper, who was he was a personal aide to Himmler, the head of the SS. I mean, he was an up-and-comer. He said they got off their tanks. He had come in with 5,000 men. They got off their tanks, left them right where they were, and started walking back to Germany. Literally, they walked back to Germany. He had 800 men with them, and that was the end of it. He says that's when I knew that the attack from the Ardennes wasn't going to work. It was a little bit later for Manteuffel down in the center. He kind of realized this isn't going to work. And the reason that it didn't work wasn't because of the head-on collisions. They happened everywhere, but because the timing, they got their timing thrown off by people fighting up and down the line, and then holding the shoulders in the north and in the south, so they couldn't expand it. They couldn't expand it. And so American artillery, when it got in with, it could range the supply lines for what was left out there going out to the March Plains. Do you want to talk a little bit about what happened that when they started going around Bastogne? And then they started building up more. Hitler said, what the heck's going on? Then he started dumping more divisions. He's bringing them in for everywhere.
Oh, yeah. But you made a good point about the logistics. And one of the things that happened is that they ran out of gas a little bit. They started out with 240,000 troops and all these 2,000 tanks and so forth. And they started going across to these 5 spearheads, 2 in the north, 2 in the center, including St. Vith and Bastogne, then 1 in the south to block Patton. So they're getting up, but they were told, we don't have quite enough fuel for the tanks. You can go, maybe 100 miles all together. But you have to find your own fuel to capture the American fuel dumps. And we were up at Spa, remember, John, up by Stavelot?
Yeah.
There's a little road that goes off to Spa, which is where the American First Army headquarters was under Courtney Hodges. And there was a huge fuel dump up there. And Piper missed it. Remember that?
Yeah, that made a big difference.
And we blew it up.
Yeah.
We blew it up. But if he'd got that, he might have made it. He had to sort of, tanks are running out of gas, he had to sort of abandon them and leave them and walk back.
Yeah.
But later on, we're getting over to the ideas over here by Marche and so forth. Which, the idea is to get to the Meuse River.
Yeah, see, what happened was, while the Bastogne guys, people were fighting, they were, I think, tying up about 2 divisions of Germans. Right. All the other divisions were going around, and they were going out to get on the Meuse River to get up to Antwerp.
Right.
So,
and they got about 45 miles. They had to go another 15 or 10. Sometimes they were right at the edge of the Meuse River.
Yeah.
But it reminds me, when you talk about running out of gas, people say that, the United States bombing campaign, strategic bombing campaign against Germany, they say it didn't break the morale of the German people, and the Germans had diversified their industry under Speer, and it really didn't hurt that much. We lost 60,000 pilots, airmen. Half of them were captured and half were killed on those planes. It was 6,000 planes went down. People don't know.
We lost more pilots in the air over Europe than we lost Marines in the Pacific. Can you believe that? We lost a lot of Marines in the Pacific.
Yeah, that's right.
But that air campaign was costly. Just to get back on an airplane and go do it again.
And the point is that it worked in 2 regards. It hit the marshalling yards, it stopped the railroads and the transportation centers where the Germans getting supplies through. They couldn't even get supplies into the Bulge. They had to go all the way back to Bonn to bring supplies because we knocked out all the bridges and the roads with our B-25s and so forth, B-17s. So that's one factor, that the bombing campaign worked. We hurt them on the fuel front. We hit all the refineries, and really, it worked in that regard. You can see it at the Battle of the Bulge. If there's any question, they were running out of gas. Yeah.
Which reminds me, when our guide, Henry Mignon, we were talking to him about how amazing the artillery up on American artillery on Elsenborn Ridge was. Well, he was a Belgian artilleryman, and he goes, well, what was amazing to him was that the ammunition got manufactured, transported, brought up to where it was needed. I mean, even some of the dog sleds from up here at Rimini, the Army War Dog Center, were over there supplying them. And a couple of guys from Montana, running the sled dogs, but he was amazed by that, and he was such an interesting guy because he's seen like guys like Randy and I a lot, but I think he took some special effort with us. Well, he took us to his home in Hoffelis. His dad had been wounded out in the woods. He was a forester when one of the American bombers crashed earlier in the year, earlier in 1944. Right. And he was laid up in the house, so he goes out to try to get some water. He breaks some ice for water, and he gets hit by an artillery round. That Hoffelis is, it's in the center. It's in the center of this whole thing. But anyhow, so he comes back in. He stays alive long enough to say hello, say goodbye to his 11 kids, and then Henry said he died. So they took him down in the basement. So what happened then was, they had a German soldier come in while they're all in the basement, and he's looking around for somebody to shoot, I guess. Yeah. And he said they were all scared to death. They didn't know what this guy was going to do. He's waving his gun around. And then they said the cellar door closed, and they waited and waited. And then a little while later, an American soldier opens the door and comes in, looks around and saw all the people that were hungry and started giving them candy bars. He said it was a big difference.
Well, we also had another person, another godfather helping us back here before we left, a fellow from Helena named Ed Miller.
Oh yeah,
Remember,
yeah.
he'd been there. He'd been out there. He told us what it was like to be up there in the north where he was with the 69th Infantry. And when the Germans would fire the artillery shells into the trees, and you have those tree bursts, you know, those wood fragments coming down, spikes coming down, and you couldn't get away from them. And Ed talked about what it's like to be, the shells are starting to hit the trees, and what do? Do you dig in, or you jump in the foxhole, or you try to run your way out of that area, you know? And and he was very, very calm and passé about it. It was, you know.
This Ed Miller had been drafted. He was a bank teller in Bozeman. He got drafted. He ends up in this godforsaken situation, and so it's after they're finally getting back over to Germany, and he said they crossed a clearing. His infantry platoon crossed a clearing. It was a bad scene. They got caught by the Germans in the open, and a whole bunch of his friends got killed. So they go down the road a ways farther in the snow, and at the end of the day, the company commander says to Ed, we need to go get those weapons off those guys. So they go back, and Ed says they went into the clearing, and his friends, and he said they were just like frozen solid, you know, in different positions in the cold. Yeah. And he said he had to pry the weapons out of some of his friends' hands. Yeah. But he said he'll never forget, he swore he heard church music.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The one of the things that really helped us that we were talking about was artillery. And the American artillery was quite good. Up north, when the 12th SS was trying to take the Elsenborn Ridge up there to control the high ground so they could block off the U.S. Army coming down from the north. And they got stopped up there at Krinkelt and Rockeroth. But they got in a kill zone up there by the Elsenborn Ridge. And we had a guy up there who was Colonel Andrus, and he was quite the artilleryman. Yeah. And he decimated them with American artillery. We used something called time on target, John. You probably know about all that stuff.
And posit fuses.
And posit fuses and proximity fuses. And those really wiped them. The Germans said afterwards, they said that Americans with their proximity fuses and their time on target, with all the guns, we were really good at organizing. We're also good at combined arms. Yeah. We had those Typhoon British airplanes and the P-47s overhead. And when the skies cleared on about the 27th, 23rd in some cases, that's when the Germans were really in trouble, when the skies cleared. For a long, first 5 or 6 days of the battle, first week, up until Christmas, they really had cloudy skies and we couldn't get any air support in there for our people. But after that, they were just terrorized of our planes, tore them up.
Yeah, the posit fuses, they were called. Apparently, when one of those artillery rounds would land, it would destroy everything within 175 square yards.
Yeah. And that's what happened when you're talking about the next phase of the battle. When they bypassed Bastogne, some of the units, you know, the Germans went right around it and went on over they actually got to the Meuse River crossing. But by that time, Eisenhower brought in so many reserves by that time. You know, we brought the 75th Infantry Division, the rail splitters, the 84th. We brought in the 1st and 2nd Armored Divisions over there, which were huge divisions. And then we brought in, just everybody. We had, you know, by the time, we had 2 or 3 million men in Europe by that time we brought in, but they were all coming in. And we had, like I say, we had 600,000 there. We took
we took the same amount of casualties cleaning that out to get back up to the German border where the Dragon's Teeth were that we had taken when they came in. It was a very costly battle.
Very costly. The counteroffensive, our counteroffensive was very costly.
And I just got to say it. When we were looking at those foxholes on the north of Bastogne, well, they're Easy Company foxholes.
Yeah.
And for the 501st, and there's snow on the bottom of them. And I'm going, oh, those poor guys. I mean, how did they keep it? How did they load their weapons? The classic picture for the Battle of the Bulge was a Montanan from Great Falls. I'm having trouble with his name right now.
Beesnick or something.
I'll see if I can find his name. But they have a picture of him taken by the U.S. Army Signal Corps, where he's reloading in the snow, you know, with cold fingers, reloading his M1. He's got 2 dead Germans in white clothes next to him, and he's getting ready to shoot somebody else. Well, just being able to do that with your fingers is very difficult.
Yeah.
But the thing that just really gets me that people need to start thinking about is there were no Republicans and there were no Democrats. There really weren't in those foxholes.
Yeah.
Those guys, they took care of each other.
Yeah.
And the other day I had a veteran tell me that there's Republican veterans and there's Democrat veterans. Bullshit.
Yeah, that's right. We heard that from Mignon too.
Yeah.
Henry Mignon was very interesting. He and one other fellow are the two top guides for the Battle of the Bulge in Europe. That if you want to get a good guide, we got one of the best. And he was kind of happy with us, I think John and I, because we came out in the winter. We came out
Yeah.
to see what it was like at the time. And most of the guys studying the Battle of the Bulge go out there in the summer when the Bastogne Museum's open and when it's a little warmer.
Yeah.
But we stuck it out with Henri in the cold, and
Yeah.
I think he liked that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons. It deserves thought. It deserves being aware of what happened. But again, I mean, we've brushed over it so quickly. But each one of those points, Don Butenbach, the Twin Villages,
Right.
Hofen going down to the
Right.
break-in by Patton, all of that is covered in separate episodes in this podcast. Just go back through the podcast down to
Right.
the first couple and you'll
Right.
hear it if you're interested. But I think the people that did this deserve the respect of at least having us be aware of what they accomplished. And I think that's about it.
That's it. Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Thank you, John.